Today on the LA Food Podcast, I'm your host, Lucas Servodio, and while y'all were at the Eras Tour living your best Swiftie lives, I had a slightly different anti-hero on the brain. David Chang's Secret Chef is out on Hulu, and Father Sal joins me to break down the first season. We discuss the concept, the contestants, the challenges, and ask ourselves whether one of the most iconoclastic chefs in the game succeeded in breaking the mold of cooking competition shows. Did the show make us lovers, or did it create some bad blood between us and the Major Domo media family? Listen to find out. But first, it's been a couple of chaotic news weeks in food. Taco Maria has closed, John Tesar tried to get canceled, a diabolical service fee spreadsheet has burst onto the scene, and our city has been confronted with a pork crisis that's squeezing barbecue pitmasters and carniceros alike. We discuss all of that and more coming up next. So if you're feeling the weight of the week gone by, dear listener, maybe just shake it off, because without further ado, it's time to chow down. Joining us today on the pod is a man who once mistook a closet for a bathroom at a party. It's Father Sal. How you doing today, Father?
Yeah. I went to the bathroom to look for a jacket. That was a mix-up. That's what happened.
Look, we don't have to tell the listeners the details. They can know the broad strokes, but needless to say, he was not invited back to that particular party venue.
Good Lord. Hello from the Windy City, man. How you doing?
Dude, Chicago, I love your dedication to recording the LA Food Podcast anywhere but LA.
I literally packed my new professional mic in my carry-on. I was a little weirdly, my girlfriend and I watched a bunch of 9/11 documentaries yesterday, right before I flew, and then I packed this microphone in my backpack, and I was like, I don't know. It looks weird. It looks a little suspicious. Let's hope nothing happens. Let's hope nothing happens. But yeah, no. As long as I'm not in Los Angeles to record the LA Food Pod, I'm happy to be here.
What brings you to the Windy City? Do you have any fun culinary plans?
A couple of fun culinary plans. I'm letting my buddy John plan out our itinerary, and tonight we're going Ethiopia in a spot called Demera. Which looks really good. Very excited for that, and I'm really hungry. I didn't do enough planning ahead for the trip to get a reservation at Ever or something like that from the Bear, or even maybe I'll try to swing by the restaurant that's the actual beef in real life or something. That'd be kind of cool. But for future Chicago trips, we'll try to ramp up the fine dining.
You have to try an Italian beef sandwich. Tell me what you think. Also, recently I had 2 Chicago food items, which I would love your take on. One is a Chicago-style hot dog, and 2 is a Chicago-style tavern-style pizza pie. So not their deep dish, but that thin, crispy tavern-style pie. I would love to hear from the horse's mouth in Chicago, if you're able to have an authentic version of each, what you think.
Ooh, yeah. I'll see what I can track down. Yeah, absolutely.
The weirdest part of the Chicago dog for me was they put tomatoes on it, which feels not like the kind of thing you would do in a city that experiences a lot of winter.
Right. You even mentioning that makes me not super want to try the Chicago dog. I'll be honest. But tavern pizza sounds great. That's right up my alley.
Okay, well, I look forward to you doing neither of those things. Look,
you know me so well, bro.
Today, I know, it's disturbing. Today, we are going to be discussing television. So I wanted to kick this off with a little bit of an icebreaker, since you haven't been on the pod in a while, that I got from a TV show. So as you know, I'm a big fan of Love Island. And one of the contestants asked another contestant a really deep philosophical question, which I was going to text you in the moment, but then I thought, actually, I'll just ask him this on the pod, because I think it's really important for the listeners to know how you would answer this, to learn something about you as the co-host of the LA Food Pod. So are you ready for it?
I'm a little worried. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Would you rather have sex with a dolphin, but nobody knows? So sex with a dolphin, but nobody knows. Or would you rather not have sex with a dolphin, but everybody thinks you did? Your reputation is you're the guy who had sex with the dolphin.
Definitely the latter. I think definitely the latter. I don't want to fuck a dolphin. I'm just gonna be straight. And also, the thing you do, there was like a quote that was on like my third grade classroom wall. It was like, "What you do when no one's watching is who you really are." And I don't really want to be the guy who fucks dolphins. So at least, look, I can make it. I think there's a way to spin it out. Like it's a funny story. I have plenty of embarrassing stories in my past that I can spin out and be like, "Yeah, Goofy saw that one time," but I will know deep down. I mean, not even that deep down that I never did it. Makes me much happier.
Yeah, I think a big thing for you too is like you'd have to get in the ocean to actually fuck the dolphin,
Great
which
point. I
feels like a
somehow didn't even think of that. That's a great point. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna
yeah,
like gonna fuck a dolphin and get eaten by a shark. Sounds like a terrible time. No, no.
yeah. Bad idea for you as someone with a crippling fear of the ocean. No, I think that is pretty much what I expected from you, but now our listeners know too.
There you go. Why does this? What does that have to do with anything? I'm sorry.
Look, it's just I heard a great tip. You gotta learn about the people behind the podcast, and so I want people to learn a little bit about you. Okay, so speaking of learning about people's different personalities, though, I wanted to
Mm,
kick off today's podcast with some news that a friend of the pod made. Not really a friend of the pod so much as a character on a show that we like, aka Top Chef. Chef John Tesar of I want to say the South Carolina season. So
yeah,
season
and
what was
Seattle
that?
actually. Seattle
Uh,
initially, and then South Carolina All Stars. Yeah.
So he's a double dipper, and he is a Dallas-based chef, but he also is the name, the face behind a restaurant at a hotel down in Laguna Cliffs, a fancy restaurant. He was caught on camera saying some interesting things to some striking workers. Did you catch this?
You sent me the article. I'm actually gonna be honest. I didn't read the article beyond like he gave the middle finger and cussed them out, so I don't know the context. But I just thought that was kind of funny.
The video is taken from the perspective of the striking worker at the hotel. They're like the restaurant workers from the hotel in Laguna Cliff. I think it's a Marriott or something like that. And he's basically seen going up to the workers and saying stuff like, "Oh, you're a horrible person. You're so lazy. You bendeja, not pendeja,
Yeah,
bendeja."
right.
And and he says, "You can take your strike and shove it up your ass." And he's giving them the
Wow.
middle finger. It's honestly like if you want to get canceled, he checked all the boxes.
Yeah, and I think if I recall correctly, he had like a reputation. He has had a reputation for a long time about being kind of a piece of shit. I think is the thing, and he used Top Chef. The impression is that he used Top Chef to kind of launder his reputation a little bit, and like came back and like was trying to like be really nice on the show and not a dick. But I think he might be a dick in real life, and yeah, this confirms that. I don't know what he was
Yeah.
thinking. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I know. He's known as the most hated chef in Dallas. That's sort of
There you
like his
go.
moniker. So yeah, so not exactly someone you necessarily want to be associated. But look, moving on from that story to one about that also features upset people in and around restaurants. So there's a Google sheet going around
Hmm.
in Los Angeles that somebody created that logs all of the service charges at the various Los Angeles restaurants. And it's been
Hmm.
making news. Like somebody got really upset about all of the service charges at restaurants, created a spreadsheet, and it's become like, kind of like a cult phenomenon here in Los Angeles. It tracks all of the service charges. It has little notes in it about like, reservation policies and what they do with their service charges and whatnot. My question for you is, has corporate culture ruined dining?
Has corporate culture ruined dining? I don't think so. And it's also I don't know if question would be my takeaway from this news necessarily in the sense because like I don't I also will say I don't like service charges are a bit of a mystery right to the diner and how they're used and I know there are certainly cases where those charges do not go to the actual people providing service right and to waiters and stuff that's not good that's generally bad behavior but I also know that tipping is not a very good like is essentially like a service, courtesy, right? Not a great system either. So yeah, has corporate culture ruined dining? No, I don't think so. But I do think service charges I loop in with kind of tipping culture, prices, living wages, wage theft. these various issues of like the economics behind how dining and hospitality works. And I'm assuming this person was like a disgruntled customer, probably from like Beverly Hills, who's like a multimillionaire and could definitely afford to pay service charges, but doesn't want to.
Well, that's why I asked the question, has corporate culture ruined dining? This strikes me as someone who got bored at their like fake email job and
Right,
was
right, right,
like, "You
right.
know what I'm really pissed off about? I'm really pissed off about these service charges. So I'm going to create a way to dox all of these restaurants that have these hidden service charges. Hidden. It's not hidden. It's on all it's on
Yeah,
all of their the checks when you get them, you know, just take a minute and read. I think it's even on a lot of menus, frankly, before
some
you even
menus.
order.
Yeah, yeah, usually, yeah.
And this corporate, disgruntled worker created this spreadsheet and sent it around to all their friends. And one of their friends was like, you know what? I know somebody at Eater. I'm going to send it to them. And now it's a whole thing. People are going to be looking at this spreadsheet being like, oh, this restaurant has a 5% service charge and this one has an 18% service. I'm going to the one with a 5%, you know? I just think like, guys, we're overthinking this a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. Like if you go, my fundamental perspective generally is like if you go out to eat, and you're planning to spend money, you need to know you have enough money to tip heavily or tip appropriately, right? And to pay relevant service charges. I think it's fair to ask where the service charges go, right? That kind of transparency could prevent bad behavior. But yeah, this sounds like a guy who's like getting a divorce and his kids hate him, and instead of going to therapy, he's like, I have he's a lot of anger. He's gonna go use it in this maybe not so productive way. But honestly, if it does like kind of raise some questions as to why XX restaurant has a 25% service charge, and it turns out like the corporate overlord of the restaurant or the restaurant chain that owns the group is actually skimming that all off, then I'm like, okay, no, that's something that should be brought to light. But it's not the same thing as something like reservation fees, right? Which I know, like we saw an article about that this week as well, which I think sound completely reasonable, right? Or a 10 to 15% service charge to guarantee that they have enough to like distribute among their staff. I will say tipping culture to me has never made a lot of sense, and service charges that are not like charges that are not built into the menu or the cost to guarantee wages and that you're charging your food effectively, like or at an appropriate level to make enough margin doesn't always make sense to me. But yeah, I don't know.
I think it's a good point. I think that the best case scenario for this is transparency, right? I mean, we did talk about this, about the practice of those restaurants in Hollywood, like Katine and Mother Wolf, being accused of stiffing their workers, as was the John and Vinny group. Like all of these restaurants have sort of like fielded these accusations. So if the best case scenario here is that these restaurants face added transparency and we're sort of shaming them into doing the right thing, yeah, there's probably some positive benefits out of that, but I don't know. To me, it just seems like let's let people live a little bit, you know?
Let them live. Let them live.
You bring up the excellent topic of reservation fees, and I thought this is a really interesting concept to me. So, Eater put out an article this week about the rise of the reservation fee, and it's a topic that's gaining a lot of popularity with restaurants who face a couple issues, which are there's no shows when it comes to reservations, there's bots, there's scalpers who like buy the reservation and then try to pawn it off on other people for a profit. And oftentimes that results in people not showing up for the reservation and the restaurant loses money on that. So what some restaurants are doing is they are charging people a deposit for the reservation. Sometimes it's a deposit that goes back on the card. Other times it's a deposit that actually gets put towards the meal.
Yeah.
I think this is a great idea. It covers the restaurant's ass. And also, I think what it does is it weeds out people who are just snagging up reservations and leaves the reservations for the good people like us who are actually going to show up. I'm all for this. What do you think?
No, no, this is necessary, right? In the world of Open Table and Resi and other sort of online reservation apps, this must be in it. I'm actually surprised sometimes at how low reservation charges are. They should, in my mind, given the risk of like a no-show, which is a real impact on the restaurant's like revenue and bottom line. Like I expect to see them cranking up more towards $50 or so. depending on the restaurant. But like, yeah, no, it has to be done. This is something that, uh, yeah, this is like a logical thing to me. It makes sense. I've been guilty of making an open table reservation, or like having parents in town and be like, all right, do we want this spot? Do we want this spot? And then like you cancel the other spot like maybe a little too soon, and you worry about it. Like, I think it's completely reasonable for restaurants to like make sure they have at least some money coming in for a table, because people not showing up is terrible. It's
Sure.
not good for the business.
Does everybody do that? Because I've definitely been guilty of that too, like making multiple reservations in one night when you have out of towners in town or something like that. And you're only going to go to one, but you make multiple just in case. And yeah, you do your best about canceling the one you're not going to go to in time, but it doesn't always work out. Is that something that we should probably stop doing?
Maybe we are the problem. Maybe they're like, they're saying that, so they really mean Saul and Luca are not showing up for the reservation. I don't think it's uncommon, for especially for like bigger groups or something, or like I said, family or whatever special occasions where you're not sure what people want and you want to have an option or two in place. Then again, we're also people who love an itinerary and like to plan shit out a lot, and so maybe we are one of the few. I think the more legitimate problem based on the reporting seems to be that bots are like an actual problem here, right? And like booking up tickets, kind of resale them, just like Ticketmaster and other ticket sales sites have had similar issues with like scalping essentially, or resales. But in that case, at the very least, someone's buying the ticket in the first place and then just like reselling it at high cost. In this case, if someone doesn't take the reservation, restaurant screwed. So yeah, absolutely, they should be charged.
You know what we need for people like you and I? We need a list of the best restaurants for walk-ins. Like restaurants where you're guaranteed to have a seat for walk-in that's still good. Maybe it's a restaurant
Mm.
that's not quite as hot as it used to be. Maybe it's like, 5 or 6 years old. You can still get a table. Or maybe it's just a restaurant that doesn't take reservations or something like that. So that when you're planning an itinerary, yes, you have your reservation, but then your backup is like one of these places nearby that doesn't take a reservation.
I love that, Brant. I hope you're listening. The infatuation just shot another infatuation list idea right over to you.
Oh my God. Speaking of, let's talk about how the fact that Eater steals all of our shit.
Oh my god. I can't remember what was the other one. There were like three separate articles now where you and I have talked about something on this podcast, and a week later, Eater's like, "Hey, here's this cool new headline we thought of," and it's like, sounds familiar, Eater.
Look. No shade towards Eater. I love all our friends there, Karen, Virali, Eater, we're big fans. But this has happened a couple times now, and it is starting to raise questions at LA Countdown / LA Food Podcast HQ. Most recently, what happened is Eater, and this was not Eater LA, to be fair, it was Eater Chicago. They put out an entire article predicting how the Bear season 3 will unfold, which is a literal bit we did here like 3 weeks ago.
It's a national conspiracy. They're watching us. They're trying to squash us, and they're trying to steal our shit. The way Zuckerberg like buys his competitors, that's what's happening here, man. They're just trying to copy the product. And no, who else could have possibly come up with the purely original idea of anticipating future Bear storylines? Who in this world could have ever come up with it if not us? So, yeah, I don't
Yeah,
trust it.
I don't trust it either. We are very much the Twitter to their threads. That makes us Elon Musk though, which I'm not crazy about. But what I did appreciate their takes. They went more in a general direction. They were like, okay, their predictions were Carmi wrestles his demons.
Hmm.
The other one was bring on the beverages. I guess they anticipate some sort of cocktail program coming to life
Right.
at the Bear. So something to do with a critical splash, which we kind of had too, in terms of like
Yep.
them achieving wild success, and then finally some sort of star power angle, which I quite liked. But to me, this is kind of a phone in. I would have liked to see an entire episode written out the way we did it. Then again, these people probably have real jobs.
We is in quotes for that one. Your 10-minute monologue of a spec script, not quite a we thing. But no, I did like this article, and I think it was what I would have liked. Yeah, some riskier takes would have been fun too. I think these are pretty reasonable, like in the realm. I didn't the cocktail program one is interesting, or like a sommelier coming in, just in terms of introducing a new character to the restaurant dynamic. was an interesting idea because those characters have been pretty set for 2 seasons now. I do wonder as they grow, right, are they going to bring in new dynamics and personalities into the restaurant itself? And the Carmi wrestles as demons, yeah, he'll have to do that. The celebrity thing I wasn't so sure about, but I do think it actually made me realize that I think what they'll get is like a maybe middling review or something initially, or like a kind of like a B plus, right, or a B, not like a knock out the park. That almost makes it too easy. And then there's like kind of like a commentary on like the review culture and like actually how good are restaurant critics at identifying great dishes or great work. They kind of touch on that a little bit in season 1. Where Kami was calling the reviewer a hack because he didn't identify that the sandwiches were different or stuff like that, which would also just be Kami being like a little bitch. But yeah, I think I'm just excited for season 3. I watched it again with Emily. We watched the whole two seasons in like 48 hours. It was like a marathon.
Wow.
So I just can't get enough of Bear.
I still can't get my wife to finish season 2. So, or actually, I think she's still finishing season 1. Actually, so, but we'll get there. We'll get there. She's committed to the cause. It just it's slow and steady wins the race. I think the critic angle is really interesting. What I would like to see, and this may be another spec script coming, although I'm not going to cross the picket line. Come on, we're SAG strong here, okay? I think it would be interesting if Carmi has a romantic interest in the food reviewer, in the food critic, almost like a rom-comification of the bear. I always thought that would be an interesting angle for a rom-com.
Wow, you are a chaotic writer, man. you between that idea and the spec script, there's just a lot of romance happening in Luca world, and everyone can fuck anyone. I guess is the core tenet of the Luca writing, the Luca school of writing.
Another twist. The food critic, it's a dolphin.
Stupid. Although I'm not sure that I don't want to mess with our run of show here, but someone who's talked a lot about the influence of food reviewers and the negative sort of impact they can have on restaurants and chefs is Dave Chang, who I know we'll be talking about today as well a little bit.
Yeah, we're going to get to the Dave Chang portion of the podcast here in just a little bit, but that's a good point. It's a really interesting discussion, the relationship between critic and restaurateur and chef, and also I think the distance between critic and the public, honestly. I think that the takes that critics have are so far off what the public has sometimes. You know what I would love to see? I would love to see for restaurants a Rotten Tomato-ometer, which is like the critic. Dude, yeah, the critic
I see.
score.
I see what you say. Yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Critic score next to the public score.
Yeah. I think that's kind of cool. Rotten Tomatoes, I think, is like an evil thing to begin with, and Yelp is, of course, the audience score of restaurants right now. But there's no aggregate for like the critical score or whatever. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. This is one of our favorite topics on the podcast, right? We had like the whole idea of like, what if food awards were like 30% voted on by the general public, 30% by the industry, 30% by critics and stuff like that. I mean, I just find it like a continually like fascinating thing, and I do hope they get into it in season 3. It'd be a really interesting, and given that they seem to be going for a star, I'm sure it'll become relevant to the show.
Yeah, I'm still hoping for a sort of like Carmi gets canceled storyline. I think that would be really interesting, and I've said it in jest before, but I actually think it would be really interesting, and it would also be interesting to see what happens with Sid literally having to take over the helm.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Cancel will be. I mean, look, Carmi certainly has an ongoing edge, as we saw that, and like bad behavior. Cancel would be a bit far for me. I don't know if I'd see that happen, but I do think there might be an interesting conversation about like what Carmi gets from his role or his obsession in with the restaurant, right? And whether I think your prediction that at some point Sid will be the sole lead of the restaurant in some way, shape, or form is probably accurate. I could see the show kind of trending towards its end to like Sid pursues her passion in a healthy way with the right kind of balance, hopefully, and Carmi realizes he has to like step back in some sort of way to have a full and balanced life.
Yeah. Well, look, we could talk about the bear all day, but I suppose we should move to some real life topics. So I'd like to quickly touch on the closing of a real life restaurant. It's an iconic restaurant here in Southern California. Taco Maria in Orange County announced a couple weeks ago that it was closing, and it kind of came out of the blue as one of Los Angeles, or the Los Angeles greater area's best restaurants probably of the last decade. What's interesting to me about this is that this is the second closure in a short period of time of a restaurant in sort of an upscale mall. And I'm just
Hmm.
wondering, is this the death of mall restaurants? Do we just not like mall restaurants as diners?
No, well, so my understanding is that they closed at this location because rent at the mall that they were at was too high or something, or they had a deal, like their deal with the landlord got screwed up. Very Sunset Beer, like, if I'm not mistaken. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. So it's a thing where maybe what's happening is that locations at upscale malls are actually like one I will actually say malls are not great spots, I think, for restaurants, as we saw
Mhm.
from a seafood restaurant we visited recently, and
Angler.
now Taco Maria. Angler, that's right, which we really enjoyed and I believe closed as well recently. uh I think just in terms of location to bring people in for that kind of level of dining doesn't quite fit as a vibe. And I think there's also this reality that, like, as we're seeing with other, articles that came out this week, costs of ingredients are rising, inflation's really impacting the industry, and cost margins are so thin that if something like a rental agreement gets too expensive, then it's just not going to work out. And I imagine at an upscale mall spot, that would be the case. So I expect to see Taco Maria back somewhere or in some form. At the very least, the chef will be, based on the article that I think I saw. Um, but yeah, it is a bummer. It is a bummer. It is a sign of times changing, I think, in some significant ways.
Yeah, it's almost like the pendulum is it's like swinging again. It's almost like I feel like in the last recession, I'm talking like the Great Recession of 2008, that sort of gave birth to like the food truck movement. Like chefs
Right.
could not afford brick and mortar, so they started doing it on their own. And Taco Maria also started as a taco truck. Then, sort of as like the economy picked up, uh, Obama was killing it, bringing the economy back, and they started to open more brick and mortars, and now maybe also because of the inflation, there's obviously been talks of another recession for a long time. We're seeing the pendulum swing back, and I think a lot of the most interesting concepts are happening once again in these pop-up destinations,
Yeah.
or in places where they don't have to pay rent, like Poltergeist, which is
Yep.
not a not a pop-up. Diego, it's not a pop-up, but it's a concept inside another place where they didn't have to like take over the rent entirely, I don't think, right? So I think it's in some ways a really exciting time to be a restaurateur, and in other ways, a really scary time, which brings us to the next topic, which is, did you know we're facing a pork crisis here in Los Angeles and frankly in the nation?
I did not know. I do know now, and this is, I think, an interesting topic. This is right up my alley.
Oh, is it? I thought you were going to be like, I do not care about this topic because
No,
I'm a
no,
brisket
no.
boy.
I am a brisket boy. I will say that. I had no idea, by the way, that brisket margins were particularly thin, and that barbecue places really made their money on pork. That was a cool fact we learned from this Los Angeles Times article. No, it's right up my alley because it's a question of policy and priorities, right? And what we value, and then how decisions like, hey, we want to make sure animals that we eat are treated humanely. How that then trickles down to other people's livelihoods, and how we then, as like a state in the case of California, and as a broader society, I guess, determine what we really value. And reading this article, one, like Ray's Barbecue, I like watched documentaries about those guys and their dad, and how they kept the restaurant going in their father's wake. And obviously, like, we talk about barbecue all the time with Moose Craft and others on this podcast, but it's not the worst thing to be eating less pork, and it's not a bad thing at all to treat animals humanely, and therefore show the cost of having to treat animals humanely in the food itself. Now, that's difficult for people who are running these restaurants that we care a lot about. But in my personal opinion, like that cost should be reflected, right, in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form.
So, listeners, the article that we're referencing, it was a Los Angeles Times article put out last week, I want to say. Basically, there's a proposition that's taking effect, Proposition 12. It's something that we voted on a few years ago. And it's a measure that requires us in California that the pork that's being served, and it's not just pork, it extends to other meats as well, but pork seems to be the sort of meat that's most deeply affected by this. The pigs basically need to have better living conditions during their life than they currently do. And obviously, what that does is it raises prices. It's making things very difficult for the wholesale producers, the farmers, and it's having a downstream effect on a lot of businesses in Los Angeles, predictably, that make their living off of pork. Obviously, that's places like carnitas shops, which literally are just about the pork. Also, some of our favorite barbecue spots, which, as we alluded to, yes, they serve things other than pork, like Saul's beloved brisket. But in order to be able to serve that brisket, they need the wider margins of the pork to fund that brisket. So, as Saul is listing out here, it's a really interesting debate about treating animals humanely versus ensuring that people are still able to make a livelihood. And honestly, you could probably boil all politics down to this simple question.
Mm-hmm. Wait, of treating animals humanely or people's livelihoods?
No, it's basically like good policy that sounds good, and
Yeah,
balancing that with allowing people to still make a living and still be able
yeah,
to prosper.
that's right. With economic impact, yeah, I think that's right. And look, and I think there's legitimate arguments to be made. Now, there are also some interesting dynamics here, and this also happens with policy where the major wholesalers and suppliers to punish California for this policy, right? And to make their dissatisfaction with the rising cost of adherence known, may be causing this squeeze a little bit, and like basically creating pressure in the state for folks to advocate for the policies on pork to maybe be rescinded or brought down. So those companies' bottom line, that's a whole other thing, and I think we'd have to look deeper into how true that is. But look, it's a it's easy to say from my vantage point, but it always has seemed to me to be that policy should protect things that I believe are social good, which like so environmental policy, right, and policies of health, but things where people broadly benefit, right, and create a foundation, a base from which we are healthy as a society. Animals to me are included in that, right? Animals should be treated humanely. There's a whole the food industry is like really fucked up, and like there's and even this policy is like a drop in the bucket, right? And once we're able to move policy in those ways to protect things that I believe that we should care about, the costs are going to be the costs for a period of time, and the economy will adjust, tastes will adjust, and people look. It's not going to be easy, but
Yeah.
if it's the cost of making sure the life of an animal is fair, then you should. I think we should do that.
I think the fundamental issue is that we've been used to the prices produced by really cheaply, shittily produced meat for way too
Yeah,
long. Like,
yeah,
the cost of meat should fundamentally be different than what it is. The problem
yes, yeah,
is
yeah.
we as consumers are going to have a really hard time adjusting to that. Not you and I
Uh,
personally, but like in general, the populace is going to go to McDonald's and be like, "Wait, my McRib is costing me how much now? I think I'll pass, I think I'll go get some chicken or something like that." And that's going to take some time to shift. But if you were looking to go out and get sushi, you expect that fish to be a certain price
mhm.
because of the way it's raised, because of the way society's expectations are. I think I see this as a problem that in the short term is going to hurt a lot. And my question for you is, what do you think we can do as consumers to help these business owners in the meantime?
Uh, it's an interesting question because, and you're totally right that like consumer behavior will slowly shift to in response to prices. Uh, I don't know. Well, first of all, we should be eating less meat generally. Like, it's not a bad thing for us to
That
eat
ain't gonna
less
have
meat. And
that ain't gonna help Movecraft.
I know it's not. And maybe, and to answer your question, maybe what it is like, hey, look, like if I have a choice of where to spend my dollar for me, like I want to like let's like try to be a bit more thoughtful or intentional with where I go spend that. And look, it's a consumer's choice. Maybe you like the steak at, I don't know, uh, Bestia. I don't know if they have steak. I don't think they do. But at a steakhouse, right? I want to go to a steakhouse and have like a nice piece of steak or a pork chop. I'm gonna go there. We might say, you and I, hey, for the meat, I'm like for a meal I'm gonna have and spend a little more money than I might have been used to. I'm gonna go and support Moose Craft Barbecue, but also because of the price of meat and because it's generally not good for either us ourselves or like to eat as regular we do or the environment or whatever. We'll be eating like reducing the overall intake. Those aren't bad things. But yeah, I think like I should say I'm not particularly concerned about Moose Craft yet. I don't think, because Moose Craft is a Michelin recognized like stellar place. The places like Ray's who are serving more like, I don't know, who are maybe slightly more under the radar and have like really more heavily rely on ribs and pork are the ones who are going to maybe suffer more, and the carnitas shops that you mentioned. So I don't know. I don't know the exactly right thing to do totally. And we have the privilege of having maybe a little bit enough disposable cash to still buy our pork. But I think it's more of like let's wait and see what happens here.
I think what I would do if I were to start a campaign about this, in order to like a consumer campaign on supporting pork run businesses, is cut down on your meat consumption at home. Like, save your dollars at home and
Yeah.
get into some more vegetable forward cooking, or invest in the cheaper meats at home and stuff like that. Like, get into offal if you really can't live off meat or something like that, and then save your dollars for spending at the restaurants, knowing that the prices are going to go up. I think that
Yeah.
that's probably the way that we as consumers can best support the businesses who are feeling the crush without feeling the crush ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also, I mean, look, I don't know. I don't know where our listeners stand generally, but this is a policy that I imagine we want to be a success and be able to hold up as a success story in California, so that other states can, similarly protect like the well-being of animals. Of course, they're still being raised for slaughter, which is not great. But I mean, we should recognize that, like, not beat around the bush here. But yeah, I don't know. It's a really interesting. I think it's a really interesting question and a really interesting like article that delves into the different sides of how a group of people make a decision about what they prioritize and what they care about.
Yeah, and we will post the article in the show notes, dear listener. Look, we're going to move on to a lighter topic before we get on to talking about Dave Chang's Secret Chef show. Did you see that Dave Portnoy is having a pizza festival in New York?
This is not a lighter topic for me. Fuck Dave Portnoy. I don't care. What if his reviews are one bite? Is that I saw this. I saw the fucking he's doing a pizza fest. Blah 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 blah. I don't care. This guy sucks.
So his famous saying is, "One bite, everybody knows the rules." The problem is, he definitely takes multiple bites when he does the review. He does he bites the tip, he bites the crust, and then he typically has a review ready. Friend of the pod, Tanya Kohler, the food curator at Outside Lands, is going to be curating this, and so definitely rooting for her.
Good for Tanya. Yeah, good rooting for Tanya. Yeah. Sorry, Tanya. My bad.
Rooting for Tanya. She probably won't be listening to this. She's going to be busy with Outside Lands this weekend, so don't worry. You haven't besmirched your name too bad. But yeah, look, I think I'm gonna definitely want to go to this. Come on, even though you hate, it's like hating the artist versus hating the art. Like, he's
That's
ultimately
fair.
doing a good service by bringing all these pizzerias together. It's in New York, but I would love to see him bring this to Los Angeles. I would totally go. The pizza festival we had here in April was awesome, but I do think that there's something about this guy's pull on pizzerias for some reason that just attracts it attracts people like a fly to the what's the word, like a moth to the lamp. Am I paraphrasing
Moth to a flame
here? Moth to a flame.
Yeah.
Moth to a flame.
that poll would be his Instagram follower count and Twitter follower count. But yeah, no, look, he's a famous guy. He's bringing attention to pizzerias that are I guess good. I don't give a shit about his thoughts on pizza or whatever, but like that's fine. Yeah, if it was in LA or someplace accessible to me, I'm sure I would go. And I hope the places benefit from the platform he's given them.
I was going to say, we need to have an entire episode, I think, on the cult of Dave Portnoy, because it brings up the entire question of who gets to be a food reviewer. Like, this guy
Yeah,
is arguably the most influential food critic in all of America.
yeah. Yeah, you're right. Look, I'm not opposed to talking about that. I think it's a really interesting thing. I was about to say who the hell gives a shit. So I mean I did say who cares about this guy's opinion on pizza. And I realized I'm talking to you, who's just a dude in Los Angeles reviewing tacos and shit. And I was like, I might come back around here a little bit, and people will be like, wait, who the fuck is Lucas Servodio? No, but you have a legitimate platform. Like I think the hundred countdown is like a real like actual interesting source of like way to do quote unquote research on a place. This place being Los Angeles, but Portnoy, you're exactly right. Like it goes back to the very same conversations we have repeatedly about like who gets to dictate the success or failure of these pizzerias. I know he's also like a harsh critic, right? Like he doesn't give like high grades out easily, which might be kind of tough for a place to hear like for like however many millions of people to hear from a place that he's like not is like kind of panning, right? So I don't know.
Yeah, he's tough, but I do think he's consistent at least, you know? And also you got to take it with a grain of salt. Like he's very transparent about the fact that he likes a certain style of pizza. He doesn't like other styles of pizza. So, you know, he has a method to his madness, but yeah, look, man, it's we live in an interesting time when Dave Portnoy has more influence than the food critic of the New York Times. I think some might say these are the end times.
Yeah, they might say. Also, should we make me insulting your latest guest a running bit on this podcast? I think this is the second time in a row I've directly like sort of semi-insulted the person who's about to come on.
Yeah,
Sorry,
no,
Tanya.
to be fair, I have set you up both times. The first time was with Ian Asbury over at Good Clean Fun. You just like ripped Natural Wine an entire new asshole right before I interviewed him. And I think the bit is going to be, I'm just going to keep setting you up, and we'll see if you fall for it. This time you did.
I
This
like
time
it.
you did.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, speaking of setting you up for success, we're going to be back to discuss one of your favorite topics, television. We'll be back to discuss Secret Chef in just a moment after the break. If you're the proud owner of a Hulu subscription, you may have noticed that there's a new cooking competition show, and that is Secret Chef, brought to us by Major Domo Media of the David Chang notoriety. Father Sal, have you seen Secret Chef?
I watched all of Secret Chef, I think, in like a day.
Yeah, well, I knew you were going to say that because I assigned it to you as homework, and you famously always do homework. So thank you for doing that. So let's talk first before we dive into the show. I really wanted to cover this because I think David Chang is a fascinating character. First of all, he is now a Los Angeles-based chef. Obviously, he's made his name mostly in New York, and he's opened restaurants all over the world, but he now lives in Los Angeles. Major Domo Media is situated in Los Angeles. I think we can pretty much claim him as a Los Angeles chef at this point. And he also is someone who has a really loud perspective on what makes for good TV, what makes for good food, what makes for good content, what makes for good entertainment. So I thought it would be really interesting to apply the same exacting lens that he applies to everything else to his show. And that's why we're doing this today.
I'm looking forward to this. Does this mean we're supposed to be like angry dicks about Secret Chef as we're reviewing it, or that we're supposed to give it a fair shake?
Only if we're angry dicks about the show. Do you know what I mean? Only if the show has elicited the angry dick that lives inside of us. And I don't know if that's the case for you. I don't know.
Move on. Yeah,
Let's talk real quick about what we think of other Dave Chang properties. So obviously his restaurants we won't touch on because there's a ton of them. We haven't been to all of them. We have been to Major Domo here in Los Angeles though. And
and it's good.
it's very good. Very, very good. He has a podcast. He put out a book last year. He has another show that he put out last year called Best in Dough with friend of the show Daniele Uditi of Pizzana being the head judge on it, and it was a pizza competition. What have you thought of David Chang's other forays into entertainment thus far? Oh, I also know he had a podcast you really liked.
Yeah. So the things that stand out to me about his non-food specific excursions, uh, one thing you didn't mention, Ugly Delicious. That was a
Oh
show he
yeah,
came up with
yeah.
on Netflix, which I thought was a really, really cool and maybe his most successful, like, kind of pop culture entree. He also did Lucky Peach, a magazine, for a little while. That was really beloved, but I didn't get a chance to read, and I think they had to shut down. No, he's been on TV for a long time. In terms of his creating his own content, I think Ugly Delicious and the podcast work have been some of the two most interesting things. My favorite podcast, as you alluded to, was actually not his own. It was on Bill Simmons' podcast, and it was following the opening of Major Domo. And it was really interesting because you could, like, hear, like, it was like it took a year, I think, or something. And basically, Dave would come on every couple months with Bill, and they would talk about, like, where he was in the process of, like, locating, building menus, testing stuff out, all the challenges. And you, like, hear Dave getting, like, more and more anxious and frenetic. It was an awesome series. I highly recommend it, folks can find it. I'm sure if you just search Major Domo, Bill Simmons, Dave Chang, you'll be able to find it online. And it was a great actually setup for season 2 of The Bear as well, because you had, like, some kind of insight into how it worked. So no, I've been a fan. I always like it when he pops up, but I will say I don't think everything he tries. I think his own podcast in particular, not not the most successful. Not the most successful.
Yeah, I'm a fan of his podcast. I think that I appreciate that they try new things. I think they're always trying like new
Yeah.
segments. I don't love the dynamic between him and Chris Ying. I think that it's just so clear. Like David Chang has such a gravitational pull in that room that I I hate to say this because I think Chris Ying is incredible in his own right, especially the work he did with Lucky Peach. But you could pretty much have anybody in that room with David Chang, and I don't think it would matter much. And it's really not a shot at Chris. I think it's just the fact that the dynamic doesn't work. In fact, I think some of the best episodes are when Chang is just going off by himself, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like the unadulterated Chang thoughts are kind of what you go to that podcast for. In terms of like his other TV shows, yes, Ugly Delicious, that was his hand at sort of like being Bourdain, right? And I thought that was a pretty good show. Not It didn't have the same sort of like longevity as a No Reservations or as a Parts Unknown. Like I couldn't have watched an infinite number of seasons of it, and I don't think it's a coincidence that there aren't an infinite number of seasons of it. But in
Mm-hmm.
terms of cooking competition shows, he has tried a couple before. The only one I've seen is Best in Dough, and it was okay. It was okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'll reserve judgment on that because I think my critiques of that show are going to be similar to the ones of Secret Chef. So let's dive into Secret Chef. Saul, would you mind giving a sort of like a rundown of the premise for our listeners?
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting concept, and I will say, to Dave's credit, whether it's Ugly Delicious or Secret Chef, does a good job of, like, coming up with interesting angles and a clear perspective on what he's trying to do. And in the case of Secret Chef, it's a group of a handful of chefs. Like, I can't remember the full number. I think maybe 10 or 11,
Yeah, I
ranging
think that's
from
right.
pro cooks to maybe amateur, like almost semi-pro private chefs, to home cooks, and they put into this challenge. Each episode has a different sort of angle, ingenuity, palette, etc., that they have to that tests the chef's skills, teamwork. But the key thing is that the judging here is blind and is done by the other competitors. So at the end of each round, the competitors put their food on the plate. They plate it up just like Top Chef, and then each other contestant has a sheet where they grade the other dishes, which I think is a really, really interesting concept, which I'm sure we'll dive into. Just like Top Chef, basically at the end of each week, someone gets eliminated with one interesting exception, and then finale, we have a winner. I think we're not trying to spoil anything, so I won't say who wins or what happens, but that's the base premise of Secret Chef.
Yeah, no, you did a really good job of summarizing what I think is actually on paper a simple concept, but comes across, I think, as a little confusing when you're actually watching it for the first time. I think if you're
Yeah.
to distill the key selling point of Secret Chef is that all of the chefs and the cooks, they cook in their own separate rooms, so nobody
Yep.
sees who is cooking what. So literally, as Saul said, everything is done completely blind. The judging and the cooking too is done all completely blind. I I I think that that's probably like the high idea. That's the
Yep.
idea that like David Chang had a gummy Daddy's Little Helper one night and was like, you know what would be awesome is if there was a show where the identities were all secret and they built it from there. And
Yep.
that's where, to me, it starts to break down a little bit. Because,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, in order to accomplish this, they have to solve for some problems, right? First of all, they have to give every chef an alias. So not only do you
Mm-hmm.
have to learn every single chef's name, you also have to learn their alias. So like the one guy was named Chef Arugula, the other one is Chef Donut, Chef Ramen. I forget all the aliases. But that already, I think, creates a barrier to the viewer of like trying to remember and keep straight in your head who the hell all these people are. I was this close to stopping watching the first episode because I was like, I my brain hurts. I've had a tough week at work. I'm not sure I can follow this.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely does get complicated. Not to mention, also, we've had a lot of conversations about hosts this past summer with Podma Leaping Top Chef. The host of the show is Sheffy, computer animated chef's hat who does comedy and talks to the chefs. We're not gonna give our opinions on the show quite yet, I think, but like the combination of like here's all these chefs, and it's a very kind of like weird, quirky vibe, and here's this weird computer screen talking to the chefs, and it's a little bit like hammed up, particularly in the first episode. I will say when I first started watching, it was a little took a minute to get hooked in because of all the stuff. Now I will say maybe by episode 3, I started getting the lay of the land. I was like, okay, here's who's what. Here's the. I was like, for a while, I was like, who's a pro and who's a home chef? I can't keep track of that. Right? Who's good? Who's supposed to be good? Who's supposed to be bad? Blah blah blah. It is definitely complicated, but I will say I think a lot of potential here, but the
Mhm.
execution was a little messy. What were your thoughts on the show itself? Did you like it?
Well, so that is exactly what you just said. It was for me a very grating experience to watch this show because of the tone.
Mm.
For some reason, they employed this super like campy, childish tone. I think it's because they were hoping that this would appeal to everybody. It would appeal to like people who love cooking competition shows, people who love food, potentially also children. And so they they have this animated guest, Sheffy. The sound effects are all like very like Cartoon Networky. There's like horns and like beepers and conveyor belts and stuff like that. It honestly sounds like a nightmare when you're watching it. It's the least relaxing show, and not in like a Cool the Bear way, where it's like frantic energy. It's just grating. It's like being at the DMV or something like that. And that I did not enjoy at all, and it actually took me a really long time to get over that and get into the competition. So if I had one like major critique, I was like, this vibe is unnecessary. We don't need to be doing all this. You guys are doing way too much.
They could have toned it down, like it could have done like maybe 1 to 2 notches. I think. I will say now, I fucking loved it. I
What?
I had a
What?
fucking blast. It took an episode. It took an episode for me to get through the yes, everything you said. The tone, the corniness, the campiness, like the personalities of the thing. When I got into it, when I got past that, Sheffy was kind of had some banger lines. Yeah, she did. You're shaking your head. Yeah, she did. She was legit funny. I thought it was weird. And here's the thing that I realized watching it. I'm like, why am I enjoying this so much? This is clearly meant to be something I don't enjoy. We even learned about the show or decided to talk about the show because I sent you an Eater article panning the existence of Secret Chef. I'm watching this having a blast. And I think part of it is exactly what we talked about during our Top Chef recap when I named the Need for Speed or whatever Fast and Furious episode as my favorite because of the game theory element that where it wasn't just about the cooking, there was also like a strategic component, right? Of interacting with like, hey, who do you give an advantage to and and who do you like make sure has no protein or whatever, like how do you decide to go about it? there is a decent amount, or a little bit amount of like strategy in this, and interpersonal strategy, and identifying who is which chef, who's behind each alias, who's actually the best person here, you think, and who may not be, and how do you then maybe distribute advantages, or how do you judge their food, and so on and so forth. I enjoyed that part.
That is the best part of the show. I will take you to task on Sheffy. Literally, the second note I have on my phone here is Sheffy must die. I hated Sheffy. I thought so. My problem with Sheffy is twofold. First of all, did not think Sheffy was funny. I don't know what you're talking about. I have a low bar for humor. My favorite actor is Adam Devine. You know, I'm not like, sitting here saying like, I need Fleabag or something. I'm saying I thought Sheffy was lame. And B, I really didn't like, and this was one of my biggest problems with the show, is they try to bring Sheffy in during the cooking challenges. Like they'll put chyrons on the screen when a chef talks about some sort of ingredient, and it'll say Sheffy says, and then it breaks down like, oh, a chiffonade is this sort of technique in the kitchen. I thought it was like really, I thought it was talking down to the audience a lot in tone. I thought
Oh,
I felt like Sheffy and all of the tone of the show was treating the audience like idiots. And I thought they probably did this because they wanted the show to appeal to people who were not foodies, to people who don't know anything about food, and it could still feel accessible to them. I I think you can achieve that without treating your audience like idiots. And I to me that took me out of it whenever I saw Sheffy. I was like, okay,
wait, I think if the show's purpose is to reach a broad audience, I think it makes perfect sense to explain what the chefs are doing, right? Like it's the same role that Alton Brown plays in Iron Chef, right? When the chefs are doing these really high level techniques, and Alton Brown, who's maybe a more palatable voice than Sheffy, comes in and explains. He's constantly, all of Iron Chef, he's just explaining what he's doing, right? And even Top Chef, they'll prompt the contestants to explain it. So I did not mind that. Sheffy
but
initially was like, "What's happening?" and eventually became. I thought she wasn't like hilarious or anything, but as a host voice, dude, she had some barbs in there. She kind of developed like kind of like a back and forth with a couple of the contestants. Sheffy killed it. I don't know how they pulled it off because they also had her doing like little facial expressions and stuff like that, like an emoji at the end of like a mean text. I thought that was a blast for what the show is. You have to accept the show for what it is, and you're like, I appreciate that they're doing this with the show.
I honestly think the main reason they did it is because they learned from their past shows that one of the biggest contracts goes to the host, and they're like, "We got to cut
Yeah.
down on costs. We ain't
Hey.
hiring Wells Adam again to host this shit. We're gonna hire this computer generated person and just. I bet you it was AI. I bet you all of the jokes were AI.
Hey, it's getting good. It's getting good is what I can say.
It's getting good. Okay, look, let's dive into the specifics of the competition. So we've talked about the show's vibe, the setting, the host, the decor, all of that. What did you think of the contestants and mixing up the skill levels, aka having the professional chefs, the private chefs, the home cooks, the influencers? What do you think about that
Oh
aspect?
yeah, the influencers. I enjoyed that. It's interesting to watch. It's kind of like when like a sommelier tries like three kinds of wine and tries to figure out which one's like the cheapest and most expensive and totally fails. And the same thing with like a normal person. They're like, I don't know. It's interesting to see like what a high end plate of food looks like, or how it's judged by then a home cook versus not. And also kind of like it kind of makes clearer too, like the kinds of ways people fuck up in the kitchen, right? It's like here's where you would fall short. Here's where people fail when they're not pros, and here's what pros look for in how they um, judge other food, which I thought was really interesting. No, I like that a lot, especially combined with the blind tasting component. And what's cool too is that the first thing they do is they actually do cook all in one room together, right? At the beginning of the first episode, they each cook a dish with eggs, and you don't know who's a pro and who's not, but you just watch the people cook. And like some people are like, "Whoa, that guy did this thing. He must be a pro." And he's like a home cook who just has like this kind of cool trick or familiar with some like tasty ingredients in his back pocket. I thought that was cool.
I like that aspect too. I will give them kudos on that. I think the mix created an interesting dynamic, though for a moment there, I thought that they just messed up the casting because there was one professional chef who for half the show was just running away with it. Like he was winning
Yeah.
everything. And I thought, okay, they tried to do the skill disparity thing here and they went too hard. They went too hard. They
Yeah.
brought in LeBron to play with the children for a moment.
Yes, I think I literally used that metaphor while I was watching. I think I literally said that. Yeah, that's right. But it was also interesting to see, what eventually happened to that contestant, and the fact that in the very first episode, I know we're not supposed to spoil, but goddamn, our influencers bad at cooking is all I'll say. God damn, it's hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I that's not a spoiler alert. We all know that influencers are bad at cooking except for this particular influencer. Um, okay, let's talk about the judging real quick. So,
Yeah.
what do you think about the secret judging? The fact that they all judge each other's food?
So interesting, but also potentially a little flawed. I think it has to be done. It has to be a part of it. I do think it should be maybe balanced with a maybe one external voice. Could even be Dave Chang's if you had the time. By the way, I have to talk about Dave Chang's cameo on this show because it was hilarious. No, the thing is this: because these people aren't like Tom and Padma and Gail, and because they're in competition with one another, like, look, I personally think they did a fair job in like judging each other's food. I don't think there was any like taking dives. I'm sure they have like contingencies, like, hey, look, you have to like fairly do it. If you like figure out like, oh, XX chef is a pro, they're running away with it, I'm gonna tank their food even though it's good. I don't think that happened, but there is a conflict of interest, and there is like a home cook doesn't necessarily know when food is always done particularly well. It's just their particular tastes, right? They're
Yeah.
not a food expert. And that's both interesting in a dynamic and, maybe a little, is it unfair? I don't know. But like it skews the judging in a way where it's not like a top chef relative like consistency. Here's what we're judging. Here's the criteria. It's much more inconsistent, which is fun from a chaos standpoint. And I enjoyed it, given again, accepting the show for what it is, which is basically like a chaotic like bunch of people in a room together, or in separate rooms, I should say, eating each other's food. But it does take away from like, oh, are we really getting the best contestant as the winner here? Maybe not.
I think that what it did for me is it made me deeply dislike some contestants because of the way that
Yeah,
they judge the food. So,
yeah,
in
yeah.
fact, we won't give spoilers, but the person who ends up winning, I thought was one of the harshest, most unfair judges. And I thought while he was judging, I gave away their gender. Oh well. Um, I thought while they were judging, if this person wins, I'm gonna be pissed because
Yeah.
it felt like they were being overly critical at every single turn. Even when some of the professional chefs ate something and were like, "Damn, that slaps. I really like that." This person was like, not enough heat, not enough salt, not enough acid. It just to me, that is a really serious flaw in this competition that somebody can be a really harsh critic and it can work in their favor. And it cheapened it a little bit to me that person ultimately ended up winning because it kind of bore out like you can be a harsh critic and win this thing.
Yeah. I agree with you. So it goes back to what the show is and isn't. You're exactly right. It is not. It's like an unfair balance for one guy to be a particularly harsh critic, and he even had that reputation. Like his alias are like, "Yo, this alias like really comes after us." Like said this mean thing. At the same time, if you take it more as like a entertaining reality show, very entertaining. Very entertaining that he said all that mean shit, and that he wasn't even, no spoilers, but like I don't think he was the greatest chef in the room by any means. And like just watching the dynamics and learning it, like watching personalities play out, right? This is really a show about personalities more than food, right? It's a show about like competition dynamics more than it is about food. I really think, right?
Yeah.
I think Dave Chang, who made an appearance on the show, came to realize that he wasn't really getting the best food in the world. I don't know what his goal was, but the way I've seen Dave Chang a lot on screen, and he comes in, and I'm like, oh, he respects nobody in this room.
Yes, it's
I
true.
don't think
It's
I don't
true.
think he gave a shit. He didn't give a shit about any of those people. It was like, you guys don't know what the fuck they're doing. How did I do? How did I end up here? Is how he like looked on screen, and that's because it's not a great food competition show. It's a great like reality competition show in a sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I won't use the word great. But Dave Chang's cameo was really funny for that reason. I did think he doesn't really work as the main judge in a show, and that's why I think
Nah.
it's good that they did Sheffy in that sense, and that they have them judge each other. Because if he has to be the Tom Colicchio of the show, it just doesn't hold the same gravitas. Like, he
Nope.
tried that at the end, doing a little bit of the Tom Colicchio, watching people cook silently and judging them, and I was like, yeah, this isn't working for me. He's doing a Tom
Yeah.
Colicchio impression, and it's like seeing Tom Colicchio, a bald dude playing Tom Colicchio on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, you know?
Right. I thought those scenes were really funny though too. Just like Dave Chang silently staring at the chef, and they'd be like, "Hey," and he like just wouldn't respond. He's just like eating their food silently, like a horror movie. I enjoyed that a lot. I also enjoyed that he was clearly so frustrated by how bad some of the contestants were at cooking that at one point he was like, "Why'd you do this with a challenge? You should have just made like this instead." And she goes, "Okay, well you can cook with a steamer. Try it." And he just cooks like a delicious dish with a steamer in this case. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because one of the other things I didn't like about this show were the challenges themselves. So, in theory, I was down with the concept. You alluded to this, but every single episode is supposed to challenge one aspect of being a chef, whether it's improvisation or teamwork or palate, etc. But the challenges themselves were so
Hmm.
derivative. Like, I was thinking back, I was
Oh
playing
yeah.
them back in my head today. I'm pretty sure I've seen every single one of those challenges on Top Chef.
Yeah, yeah. Look, you're not wrong. I think maybe like 80% of them have literally been Top Chef challenges. I don't mind. I mean, like, look, they're derivative in that maybe you can mark the show off for creativity, I guess. Ironically, given I think that was one of the challenges, but uh, they're good challenges. They're good. They're good. They're good premises. That's kind of the thing. Like the chefs. I mean, this is episode one, so I don't feel like a huge spoiler. But like the chefs, like blind, like having to team up on a dish blindly, right? Not seeing what the other one's doing. That always hits. That's always a good time, right? So the
Yeah,
challenges themselves, I found to be fun at the very least,
I
if
think
derivative.
I'm just disappointed
Mm-hmm.
because Dave Chang talks such a big game about thinking outside of the box, doing things differently, and he has some really interesting takes on his podcast when he tries to do that. When he tries to come up with these crazy ideas, it's like he has a whole segment on the podcast called like the bad good idea or something like that, right? A bad idea that's actually a good idea. And I just would have loved some of that out of the box thinking to appear in the challenges here. And I just think that was not it at all.
Yeah, yeah. And I do wonder if part of it was like, look, we're trying so much new shit already with this, with like our chefy and the whole concept that like let's keep the challenges in a sweet spot that we know that they've been tested and tried and we don't completely fall flat on our face. I wonder if that was part of the conversation they had. And I do think like look, I think your critiques of the show are basically fair, except for Sheffy, who's a blast. Uh, I think with a few small tweaks, this show could really hit with maybe a slightly better recruiting class, some clarity on how the competition works. Because I personally think the biggest flaw of the show was at one point they do like a mini Last Chance Kitchen, kind of like 60% of the way into the show, and you've not been told this will be a thing, and like it's really weird and random and seems unfair because no one was told that this was a potential opportunity. So that could be ironed out. But otherwise, I think they have all the ingredients there and enough of a platform to take the challenges to another level next time, hopefully.
I think cut your losses, don't make a second season, try something else.
Please make a second season. This is a blast. Get some better guest judges on. Make some small tweaks. This will be a great show for Hulu.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it does. I don't think Best in Dough got renewed for a second season. We'll have to see if this one does better. But I did find this, my overall take on this is the show gave me Stockholm syndrome because I was sad when it ended. Uh, I don't think I enjoyed a single moment of it while it was happening.
What?
But once it was over, I I was like, you know what? I'm gonna miss watching this.
That's because you were
So
entertained, bro. That's because you liked it deep down.
I think, as I said, I think Stockholm syndrome is a better comparison. It like gave me a high degree of emotion, and whether that emotion was hatred
Yeah.
or disdain or jealousy, because I think
Sure,
we could
sure,
make a
sure,
better
sure.
show. The absence of that emotion left me wanting it more, if that makes sense. So,
Hey.
we'll see. Look, I won't be mad if it gets another season, but I'm definitely not rooting for it.
Sure, yeah, and luckily for me, after I watched Secret Chef, I was able to jump right over to Five Star Chef, which is a show that I hope we talk about, which is like a very like the other side of the world of Secret Chef, right? In terms of food competition and really interesting to
Yeah.
watch back to back, and I think really compelling in its own different ways.
I started Five Star Chef on Netflix, and I immediately fell in love with it. So we're definitely going to
Yeah,
be reviewing that in the
fuck
next few
yeah.
weeks here. We'll do a Five Star Chef episode, but that one, listeners, if you have a chance, go and check that one out. And I do think we should do that here in a couple weeks.
Hell yeah, love it.
All right, bro. Well, look, you've sacrificed some of your time in the Windy City to spend it here with us and our listeners. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of our heart. I want to thank you for being vulnerable and open about your thoughts about intercourse with dolphins. I sincerely hope you'll go out and try a tavern style pie and a Chicago style hot dog. And I expect you to do neither.
That sounds exactly right to me. I'm about to go try some Ethiopian food. In fact, neither of the assignments you gave me. But look, if I come across either, I'll let you know. But it's not happening. Let's be honest.
It's not happening. Father Sal, enjoy the Windy City. We'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good, man.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the LA Food Podcast. Thanks as always to Father Sal. Man, what a guy. He took time out of his trip to the Windy City to spend an hour with us. How lucky are we? Thank you to you, dear listener, of course, for taking time out of your day. And if you wouldn't mind, please go leave us a rating, a review, subscribe to this podcast if you should be so inclined. Apparently, ratings and reviews really help, so I would be eternally grateful if you took 30 seconds out of your day to do that. We'll be back next week with another episode. We have an incredible guest lined up, so I am very much looking forward to that. If you're looking for me in the meantime, you can find me at the LA Countdown on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads. That's TheLaCountdown. You can also find us on Instagram at LA Food Pod. That's LAFoodPod.